Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Impact Writers Hub second installment in our speaker series. Our author for tonight is Miss Mary Elizabeth Summer. She's a suspense writer, and tonight we're going to cover plot and pacing. Give us a few minutes as we have a little bit of technical difficulties.
like chocolate? I'm not color with the
Hello, Miss Summer? Hi. Hello, Miss Summer? Miss Summer, can you hear me? Hi. Hello, Miss Summer?
She's in the
Hello?
Hello? Can anybody hear me? Oh, I think I'm on mute. Can you hear me now? No? I have joined. Now, how does this work? Sorry, guys. I'm totally a newbie.
We can hear you.
Oh, great. Fantastic. This is my first Google Hangout. I don't know if you could tell. um, and of course, my presentation is on my other computer. So let me see if I can. Hello. Oh, can anybody hear me? Okay, well now there's like a total echo here. So, okay. I think I am going to go ahead and get started. I think I am not going to be able to show you my PowerPoint because unfortunately it's not on the computer that I managed to make this work on, and I don't want to waste any more time trying to figure out how to do that. So I am going to speak to it, and then anyone who's interested, I can email you the presentation when I'm done. So here we go. Really quick. I am going to be doing a 4-part series, assuming I can get this to work again, on the critical elements that I find when writing a novel, story elements like plot and pacing and setting and research and things like that. And the first one I'm going to do is plotting and pacing. The first thing I want to tell you a little bit about is me. My debut novel, Trust Me, I'm Lying, is coming out very soon. It's coming out in October, and I have some things about that sort of inform like where I'm coming from as far as where in my writing journey I am. So that will give you an idea of what things that I am bringing to the table here in this discussion, but I definitely am not, the end-all and be-all knowledge master of writing, so I still have a lot to learn myself. To give you an idea of my background, I have a 4-year degree in English from Wells College, and I don't know that an English degree is necessarily necessary to become a published author, but I highly recommend it. I learned a lot about critical thinking and analysis and research and things like that, but generally speaking, you can learn those things, as you need them, so there's that. Mystery writer, as Alexis had mentioned, I am a mystery suspense writer, and the kind of funny thing about that is that I sort of accidentally fell into mystery writing. I initially thought that I would be like a science fiction, fantasy, paranormal writer, because that's what I grew up reading and loved and still read and still love. But I had this idea for a character, and it sort of just became this big thing that I suddenly became a mystery writer. So that's what I do now. I've written 2 mysteries, grand total. The first one being Trust Me, I'm Lying, which is coming out in October, and the second one being the sequel to that. I just turned line edits in on that this morning, so that is forthcoming. So the next thing about me is that I am published through a, quote, Big 5 publisher, and what that means is that I have sort of a different view of what the publishing industry is like than somebody who is, say, a self-published author or who maybe has a small press experience. Those are going to be sort of a different kettle of fish. And we'll talk more about that when I do the publishing and marketing section of our series here. But for now, that's something you should know about, sort of my perspective. So the other thing about me is that I'm a debut author, like I mentioned before. This is my first book, so there are still portions of the publishing journey that I am a newbie on and don't know very much about. And I do know other things about it, like I'm very close to the having gotten an agent process. That didn't happen for me that long ago. To my first submission round, I still know what that feels like because it's still pretty recent for me. And I've been through the editing phases now twice, so I have a good grasp on what all that entails. But in terms of launch day and what kinds of sales figures you're needing to get, to earn out your advance and those complicated things, I haven't been there yet, so I don't quite have everything to know about that. But for now, let's just go straight into plotting and pacing. Sorry, I'm trying to hurry up because we're so late. Sorry. So what we're going to learn today about plotting, or discuss today about plotting and pacing, are how to generate plot, how to twist plot, how to pace plot, and then I'll talk about the different tools that I use when I'm coming up with a plot for a novel. Everything from websites and books that I have read to different super author secrets that I have sort of stumbled across in my journeys. One thing to note about this too is that I have gotten a lot of my information from reading posts online, from reading books, from watching TV and movies, and listening to special little add-on things at movies that producers or directors talk about. So I've learned just a lot of information from other people, and so this is sort of an amalgamation of all of that. I'm no savant by any means. I love reading about this. I love talking about it, but there's nothing that I am going to bring to the table that I haven't read someplace else. So the first thing is generating plot. Now you have an idea. This is how it works for me anyway. You have like one little seed of an idea, like a character or a plot line or a concept, or maybe even just a line, or it could be a creature you want to, like maybe you want to do a werewolf novel, and you're like, what can I do with a werewolf? And so you have this sort of seed of an idea, and then what? Then for me, the next step is to ask a bunch of questions. So I start asking myself, okay, well, what about this character? What is her big hang-up in life? What is her wound or her, thing that she is trying to muscle through? What are her special strengths? What are her, crosses to bear? What things make her interesting? And then I start thinking about that, and it's like, okay, well, how can I shake up her world? And then you start thinking about your inciting incident, which is that thing that happens in the first few chapters that like totally rocks your character and sets them on a different path they weren't really anticipating going down. And then you just sort of go from thing to thing to thing to thing until you like build up to this great crescendo, the climax, and then you're like, well, then what happens? And you sort of resolve it at that point. So really, it's all just a series of asking yourself a lot of questions. I always take notes during that. I brainstorm with other people. I try to give myself pulse checks, like, is this really, something that even makes logical sense? Is something I had a conversation with my critique partner just like yesterday about like, does this actually make sense? So, definitely brainstorming with a partner is a good idea. I get ideas from other media all the time, especially songs. If I'm listening to a song on the radio I'm really digging, I might think about a lyric that really calls to me, and then think, how might my character that I'm working with right now, how might they feel this emotion? Like, what sort of events happening around them might cause them to feel this. That I've gotten lots of romance ideas actually from that, obviously because so many songs are based on love. But other ideas too, from like parent relationships or sibling relationships or anything. You can get ideas from songs. Television. My book that's coming out in October was an idea that I thought of while I was watching a lot of White Collar and Leverage a few years ago. Like, what about a young adult book about a teenage con artist? I was like, I really want to read that book. And as soon as I say, oh man, I wish there was a book about that because I really want to read it, then I know that that's my next idea, and that's what I need to write. So, super secret author trick for generating plot is persistence and consistency. You want to keep asking yourself questions and don't let your ideas flounder. Don't think, oh, I have this really cool idea, and then promptly put it on the shelf and don't think about it for the next 3 months, because ideas breed other ideas, and it's like a ball rolling down the hill, and ideas tend to stick to other ideas, kind of like Play-Doh, and so you really want to go with it and don't wait. Just keep at it, or else the idea will probably kind of languish. So there's that. Planning tools is the next thing. So you have your big bright idea, and you have some other ideas around it. Now about planning. I have a confession to make. I am a huge pantser. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's somebody who doesn't outline. They just start writing, and they kind of go with the flow and let the muse take them where they're going to go, or their characters decide what they're going to do next. That's kind of how I do it, because that's sort of magical for me. But because I am now a mystery writer, I have had to rein back my pantser impulses and actually plot a little bit in advance with using certain tools. You can use, there's all different kinds of things you can use for outlining. You don't have to just do the traditional, Roman numeral 1, da 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 A, and then da da da, and then 1 2 3. You don't. That doesn't work for me at all because that to me is idea like killer. I can't get from phrase to phrase. I have to have like more than that. So sometimes I'll write a synopsis first, but that takes a long time. So I've come up with these other things that I do. One thing that I use is Scrivener, and I really wish that I could show you guys the screenshot I took of Scrivener because it is fantastic if you haven't heard of it. If you, when you start to really get serious about writing, it's so much better than Microsoft Word because it's, or any tool that's sort of designed for writers like that. Scrivener I think is the best, but there are other ones out there like YWriter and things like that. But Scrivener is awesome because it doesn't alphabetize your chapters. It doesn't keep each chapter in a separate environment. You know, like if you had each chapter was a separate Word document, you'd have to close a document and open another one to go from chapter to chapter. And then to try and organize that, what if you switch where your chapter goes? And you've all of a sudden got this chapter way ahead of where it was before. You have to renumber all of the files in order to make sure you keep that order. So it's so much better in Scrivener. You can drag and drop chapters, scenes. You can put metadata with your scenes. You can put in stuff about character. You can put in stuff about research. You can like actually drag in web articles so that you have them all right there. I just can't say enough about Scrivener. But the great thing about it too is that it has a very robust outlining functionality, which means each scene has a little note card attached to it. And if you were to open up the note card view, you would see basically what amounts to an outline. So as you go, you can sort of like have this living outline that's right there with your manuscript. So, you know, Scrivener is a wonderful thing for that. The other thing that I use are mind maps, and I will show you a mind map. I have one right here. It's a giant mess. I have lots. And, you know, hopefully it doesn't spoil you guys. Oh, this one won't because this is from a different book. So this is what my mind map looks like. If you can see it, it's all these like really random bubbles that all sort of connect with each other and kind of branch off. And what I do with that is that like I'll just put a concept down, like maybe I'll put a character and I'll say, okay, so this character, I'm really trying to work out her relationship with her father. So then I put her and then I put her father right next to her. And then I start like just branching off ideas, riffing on that, basically. It's like riffing. And you put it all together at the end, you really can like open up these ideas that you never even realized you had. Like I did that for 4 of my characters for Trust Me, I'm Lying, and I realized as I was doing that there's a theme just sort of came out of it. They all had really big daddy issues. And I was like, whoa, where did that come from? It's like I put that in there on purpose, and I totally didn't. So, you know, but it helps you solidify your own ideas and make connections and relationships. So I really am a big fan of mind maps. Plus, you can doodle all over the place, and it's just, I feel like it's more free thinking, more creative space. Storyboards are the other thing that I use, and I wish I could show you that. But, you know, again, I can send you the presentation if you guys are interested. Storyboards for me, it's an Excel spreadsheet, and it's really a high-level look at what each of your chapters is, or each of your scenes, or however you want to break it out. And the great thing about it being in an Excel spreadsheet is that you can look at it all at once. So you have like just a little blurb about what your chapter is about, then you have which characters are in that chapter, whether it's an action scene or sort of an interaction scene, which part of the structure of the it lies in, and I'll talk about structure in a minute here. But if you could see it at that high of level, you can really see like, oh wow, I have way too many action scenes in a row. Like there's no time for introspection at all. And then you can sort of like move things around so that you have a better, cohesive, balanced book. So I really recommend Excel storyboards, or, you know, any kind of table that is a storyboard that works for you. Um, Timelines are another good tool. I would so be lost without timelines because I cannot keep consistent. I sit down like a week after I wrote one scene and totally forget that it was a nighttime scene, and then all of a sudden they're like 3 days later, but I'm treating it like it was a day later. So, timelines really help prevent that. I try to keep it up as I'm writing, as I'm drafting, especially the first draft. I'll keep an Excel spreadsheet timeline. I tried to combine storyboard with timeline, and that did not work for me. But I just keep it in the same document, but different sheets, so I can go back and forth as needed. And then I'll talk a little bit later about the reverse outline, which is another thing that I use. Okay, so story structure. I promised I was going to talk about this, and we'll talk about it really quick. Action leads to reaction and reflection. That is key to story structure. It's a lot of people will say, such and such happened, and then such and such happened, and then such and such happened. But that is not necessarily the most compelling story structure. What you really want to look at is such and such happened, therefore such and such happened, but then such and such happened. So you really want to look for the therefores and the buts. If you can say therefore, so-and-so moved on to the XYZ kingdom instead of the Z kingdom, then you know that that action actually resulted in a reaction. It's not like these disparate events that aren't connected to each other all of a sudden happening. You have one event, say a gun goes off, and therefore this other event happens, somebody calls the cops. Because the gun went off, somebody called the cops. Not somebody just accidentally called the cops because, no good reason. So, that's really what you want to look for in that kind of thing. And you want to look for it on a scene level as well as a chapter level as well as an overall level. So it can be tricky. So story structure part 2. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of story structure. It's not overly complicated, actually. We all have it ingrained in us because this is how we as humans absorb story. So it's pretty simple. Sorry, dog is crying. Pretty simple in that you have either the hero's journey sort of aspect of it or the 3-act play structure. I don't know if you guys have heard of either of those things. But the hero's journey is sort of the myth idea of you have this hero in his sort of normal world, and then something happens there's a call to action, his village explodes, or there's a plague, and he has to go out into the world and go through all these adventures to find the cure for the plague, and then he brings it back home and saves his kingdom, and the world can return to normal again. So it's this big arc, and you really explore all of the different parts of the hero and how they grow. That's what they mean by a character arc. So the hero's journey is classic. Think Star Wars. That's very, very specific hero's journey story arc, and it's often used. I definitely have elements of it in mine. For example, the inciting incident I talked about at the beginning, where your character is forced out of her world into something else. That for me, and trust me, I'm lying, is she comes home to find her apartment completely ransacked and torn apart, and her father missing, and he's left her a clue. And so that clue sets her off on a journey of trying to track down her dad and figure out what happened to him and what's going on. So that is sort of a piece of what the hero's journey is. There's a really great book on the hero's journey for writers called The Writer's Journey, and I read it. It's wonderful. It's really, really helpful information about how to get your character from point A to point Z. So then there's this other thing called a 3-act play, and it doesn't, it's not either or, the hero's journey or the 3-act play. It's another way of looking at structure, but it's all the same thing, really. You sort of have these different gates that you go through in a 3-act play to make sure that all of the the beats or hit all of the notes or hit that really will satisfy your reader. So a great thing to read about that is Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. He has this beat sheet, which is what I use in my storyboards so that I can make sure that I'm hitting all the right gates at all the right times, so that nothing feels overly long or too quick, or you just want to make sure that you balance out that structure so that you have the right bones. And I know that a lot of people think, oh, I don't want to follow the same formula. Oh, that's horrible. It's been done. It's so cliche. I want to be able to do my free thinking, whatever it is. But what you have to think of is structure is like the skeleton of a story. Everybody has a skeleton. Everybody has, ribs and a backbone and legs, every metacarpals and blah, blah, blah. And you need all of those things in order to be able to move. And if you didn't have those things supporting you, you would just be a pile of goo on the floor. So you absolutely have to have a structure to the story. It doesn't have to mean that you can't have all of the wild permutations built on that structure. You can we all have skeletons, but we all look wildly different, and we all dress wildly different, and we all have different motivators, and we do things differently with our bodies, but we do need that skeleton, and so does your story. So, okay, now let's talk about plot twists. Reversals, twists, and the unexpected. What the most important thing about this is think inevitable. Your end has to be inevitable, and how you get your character from point A to point B will feel unsatisfying if it doesn't feel like, oh yes, from the outset this had to be the case. I just didn't know it until I got here. And that's where all of your reversals, twists, and the unexpected come in. So, for example, The Sixth Sense. You guys probably haven't seen it, but I'm going to spoil it anyway because it's really, really old, and it's still worth a watch. I liked it a lot. At the very end, the main character realizes he's actually dead, and he's a ghost, and he didn't know that, and the viewer doesn't know that. The whole time, we think he's alive. But there are enough things sprinkled out throughout that story where you're like, oh yeah, nobody ever talks to him directly. No other person except the kid ever talks to him. And oh yeah, like he did get shot at the very beginning. Why didn't I make that connection? So it was inevitable because of all of the little hints that they put in the story along the way. But they made it so that it was a very satisfying reveal at the end. Star Wars also is another good example. I love using the Star Wars example, obviously. In that Vader had to have been Luke's father, because Obi-Wan Kenobi brings him up in the first movie. There's no other reason to bring up his father in the first movie but to reveal it in a very satisfying clinch moment in the end of the second movie. So, there is connection there. It felt inevitable because it was brought up earlier. That being said, you really want to focus on misdirecting your audience so that they don't guess. You don't want them to guess ahead of time. To sort of do that, to create that sort of sense of reversals, twists, and unexpected, the super secret author trick I use is that I just always ask myself, what is the craziest thing that can happen right now? The craziest thing that can happen that's still within the bounds of my world that it could happen. So no aliens coming down, because that wouldn't happen in Juliet's world. But something else, like what is the craziest thing that could happen? Oh my gosh, maybe the such and such is actually blah blah blah, and I mean I could give you some real examples, but then I'd spoil it for you, and I don't want to do that. But anyway, so that's what I do, especially at the end of the chapters. What is the craziest thing that could happen right now? So, but you do want to avoid all cliche reveals. So like, Luke, I am your father has been done, and it's been done really well, so you can't do it again. But you can do things, you can flip things on their head, which is what I tend to do. Like, oh, that guy actually isn't a vampire. It's actually the person you thought was the ingenue who was going to get eaten by the vampire. She's the vampire, and she, the guy you thought she loved was actually Lunch. That sort of thing where you can put cliches on their heads. Those are good plot twists. Okay, so foreshadowing. There are some things that I use for foreshadowing. I'll go really quick. The innocuous character. Have him pop up now and again, and then all of a sudden you reveal like 3/4 of the way through the book that he's actually somebody else. But if you have him sprinkled throughout as this innocuous character, people sort of think that they have a handle on it, and they don't necessarily know. So that's a good way to plant foreshadowing. Just have him do like something in the background. The offhand comment is another thing that I've done where like I've had somebody say something that made sense at the time, but it actually means something deeper, and people will latch onto that subconsciously, and then when they get to the reveal where it becomes clear what that deeper meaning was, they're like, oh, I should have known because you said it like 3 chapters ago. But it's sort of an offhand comment, and it's not something that they necessarily know to think about as important. Facial expressions are another thing that I use. Try not to use this one too often, but you can say like somebody says something, but their facial expression is counter to what they're saying. Then you'll know that there's something, like if the protagonist notices it or your narrator notices it, then you know there's something up there. So that will clue the reader in that, maybe I should have known something there. Another thing is the fake out reveal. I did this one in my first book, I'll tell you that, where I had a reveal about a certain character, and then later on there's another reveal about that character. And so what happens then is that the reveal, the little mini reveal that you give them, the reader is lured into this false sense of, oh, that person's already taken care of. They were this instead of that. And then when you pull out the big guns of what they really are, then they're just shocked all over again. So it's like a 2-for-1. Window dressing. What I mean by that is just that like you have little clues in the background of your setting. So like somebody's name on a plaque on a wall, your antagonist's name on a plaque on the wall, or you refer to a company that in sort of passing that will later become important. So it's just like part of the setting, but you can use it as foreshadowing. And then if all else fails, you can just have your narrator or your protagonist feel off about something that somebody says, so that it clues the reader into thinking, okay, there's something not right about that, but nobody really knows what it is yet. So that's another way to do foreshadowing. Again, use that one sparingly, because it could just get old if all of a sudden your character is feeling off all the time. So super secret author trick. Reader's the most satisfied if she could have figured it out but didn't until maybe a minute before the protagonist figures it out. That's the best. That's where you really want to get your reader, is that they figure it out right before the protagonist does. And this is true for any genre, not just mystery. That if it were like something they had to figure out emotionally or something like that, then you have the reader come to that conclusion just a hair before the protagonist does. Okay, so tightening the end. Fiction is not random. That's just an excuse for it. Oh, but life isn't, all set and nice and orderly. And it's like, yeah, it's not, but fiction is. And so everything has to be logical, or your reader's just gonna not trust you. So as an author, you need to get the reader to buy into the ending. Again, that kind of ties into the making it feel inevitable. And this is where I use my reverse timeline. So I'm not going to talk too much about it now because it's already almost 6 o'clock my time, like 9 o'clock your guys' time. But I have a blog post up about it, and I can give you that information then. It's basically just a timeline that you don't do until you're 3/4 of the way through the book. And then you can sort of see all of the elements that are left over. So super secret author trick for this: reduce, reuse, recycle. Like reuse all of your side characters, recycle any subplots that you have to the main plot. If you keep kind of going back to the center always, then you will have a tighter, much more streamlined, faster paced plot. So now we're going to talk about pacing really quick. Joss Whedon, one of my favorite writer guys, also director, also awesome. He once said that everything must be sacrificed on the altar of the great god pacing, and that is so true in movies, but it's really true in books too. If a scene is extraneous, if it's not doing triple duty, then it's not worth keeping. It is really important that you kill your darlings, that all those little beautiful, wonderful little pieces of prose that you're like, oh, that's just gorgeous, then you need to take it out because it's not doing the plot any service. And really what it comes down to is story. You want it to be well written, the story, but it's about the story. It's not about your prose. So keep that in mind. Super secret author trick, like I said, every scene should accomplish at least 3 goals. So have a plot goal, have a subplot goal, have your romance have sort of a kick to it in that scene. You want to move at least 3 things in a general direction. Have 3 purposes for each scene. That's my goal at least, and I've found that increases pacing like nobody's business. So that's huge. For chapter ends, always leave chapters with reader asking a question. So will your character fall off that cliff? Will your character finally find out where his mother is? How is your character going to handle the emotional fallout from the argument that she just had with her father? So it doesn't have to be like an action thing, but it does need to be a question like, well, I need to know what happens next. So definitely always leave your chapter ends that way. It's a good place for reveals. Chapter ends are. Not always, but sometimes. So that is another way to increase pacing. For nuts and bolts, for word counts, this is something I didn't know when I was first starting out, and I think it's really useful to know. For young adult novels, you want to aim for about 75,000 words, and that to me, I think what has worked for me is about 2,500 to 3,000 words per chapter. So that's variable. Obviously, some of my chapters only have 2,000 words, some of them have 4,000 words. But the idea is to keep it around there so that you have a nice balanced flow throughout. And you have to have chapters, because if you just have thing after thing after thing after, readers are just going to, like, their eyes are going to glaze over. It's fundamentally a need to accomplish something. That's why we have chapters. So beware flabby middles. For pacing, that is a common writer problem. I just had it in my last novel. You need enough twists and actions to carry the character to the climax. So you can add a subplot, but generally subplots are not the answer. You just need to make your plot that much more complicated to get it through. Not overly complicated, but have enough twists along the way that you can get them to the conclusion. So a lot of times I found with novels that I was less satisfied by, that it started out with a plot and then became subplot, like romance subplot, for like 90% of the book, and then ended, the original plot just kind of like, So you really want to make sure that you have like great subplot. So you can ask me anything. I don't know how this Google thing works. I can definitely be here for a while if you guys want. And so I think there is a Q&A function, but I don't know how to operate it. But if you want to, you could email me questions as well. My email address is maryelizabeth@mesummer.com. And also email me if you want me to send you this fine presentation that I spent all day working on and then couldn't show you guys. So there's that. I also have a list of resources here. So that's what I got. Sorry about all of the difficulties. Alexis, I don't know if you want to take over or even how you do that.
Thank you so much, Miss Summer, and everyone who came to watch her today. We will be posting a copy of her PowerPoint if she'd send that to me, please.
Oh,
and have a good night. And if you have any questions for her and weren't able to take down her email, you can send them to me and I can send them to her for you. And Thank you so much, Miss Summer, for coming, and we hope to see you again soon.
Yes, absolutely. Is it next Monday? Same
I
time?
believe, I believe so. Yes, please.
Okay. And I promise this time I will actually know what I'm doing. So we'll be all set.
Thank you so much, Miss Summer. Have a good
Okay.
night, everyone.
You too. Bye.